Okay, everybody, we'll begin now. Welcome to the Jewish Studies Center. My name is Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the Jewish Studies Center treasurer. Let me begin by saying that our thoughts and prayers today are today and in the days to come with the people and the government of Ukraine as they struggle to preserve Ukrainian independence and a free and democratic way of life. Jewish roots in Ukraine go deep. May this heritage prove a source of strength and fortitude going forward. As a symbol of my own Galician roots and solidarity with Ukraine, I'm wearing this traditional Ukrainian shirt that I bought in 2018 in Lvov. Lvov is approximately 100 miles northwest of Buchach, where my father was born. So I do have roots in what's now Ukraine. Back to today's program. Again, welcome to the Jewish Studies Center. Our class today is Roots, Building Trust Between Palestinians and Israelis. Again, my name is Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the Jewish Studies Center treasurer. As treasurer, I need to tell you that our classes are free, and I believe they're interesting and educational. However, we have many expenses, for example, paying for the Zoom services, maintaining our website, and other such things. So donations are very much appreciated. You can donate on our website under the heading Donate. You can contribute with a credit card, with PayPal, or by sending us a check. Either way, just go to our website under Donate and fill out the form. Next, I want to cover a few technical details. Today's session currently is being recorded, but the recording will be turned off at the end of the formal presentation before the Q&A, and that's to enable the people who are asking questions to be a little more free. They're not going to be recorded. Attendees are and will remain muted until the end of the presentation. But we do want your questions and your comments. Please write them in the chat box and write them to everyone. We all can see. Some people may comment on your comment. Our moderator and facilitator today is Macharat Ruth Belinsky Friedman. Macharat Friedman is a member of the inaugural class of Yeshiva Macharat, which is the first institution to ordain Orthodox women as spiritual leaders and halakhic authorities. She currently serves as the Macharat at Olav Shalom, the National Synagogue here in Washington, D.C. Macharat Friedman's responsibilities include overseeing the conversion program, supervising the operation of the community mikveh, directing adult education, providing pastoral counseling, teaching in the community, and many other things. She is a proud member of the Washington Board of Rabbis, and she sits on the executive committee of the Board of the International Rabbinic Fellowship, of which she, of course, is a member. Macharat Friedman is also a founding member of the Beltway Vad. She and her husband Yoni are the proud parents of sons Ezra and Job, and of their four-legged princess named Coco. At the end of the Roots presentation, Macharat Friedman will consolidate questions from the chat and add some of her own questions and ask them to Rabbi Schlesinger and Mr. Awad, who are the presenters today. She will also introduce today's presentation. So take it away, Macharat Friedman.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Jerry. It is truly, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've known Rabbi Schlesinger for a long time, and I've never met Noor Awad, who will be joining us shortly, but certainly heard so much about Roots. And I'm just really looking forward to being able to have this opportunity with all of you. So the way the presentation is going to be structured today is that first, we'll hear from Rabbi Hanan for about 20-25 minutes, and then afterwards we'll hear from one of his partners, Noor, and all the work that they do at Roots. And as we discussed before in advance, what they're really going to do is tell the story of their lives and their work and what brought them to this point and the significance of what they do. So I'll place we can paste the links to the big bios in the chat. But just by way of a short introduction of Rav Hanan, I'll just say that he is originally American, of course, now lives in Israel, and is just truly one of, I think, the kindest, most patient people that I know. Always has something wonderful and just sweet and supportive to say. The type we were also just discussing, the type of person who just, showed up at my sister's wedding a few years ago in Israel, and it's just comes to celebrate, and sort of the more the merrier attitude. And it is very fitting that he is the type of person who helped found Roots and really engage in the long process of bringing people who are on very different ends of a very tense and painful conflict and situation to be able to break some of that tension and bring them together. Did I get muted in the middle of that? Okay.
My mistake. Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. What was the last thing you heard me say?
You're about to introduce the rabbi, I believe.
Okay, well, at any rate, I was paying lots of compliments to Rav Hanan, and just saying that I think he is really the type most kind and genuine and patient person, and certainly the type that we would expect to be engaging in this very holy, challenging work that just involves so much of pushing yourself past and others past their comfort zones, to be able to engage in real genuine dialogue that really isn't happening in other places. So Rav Hanan, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to introduce myself, but not immediately. First, I'm going to introduce a place. I want to welcome everyone virtually to the Dignity Center. In Hebrew Arabic, a combination of Hebrew and Arabic, that's Merkaz Karama, the Dignity Center. Karama in Arabic is dignity, Merkaz in Hebrew is center. The Dignity Center is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank. It's the only place where the two sides, Israelis and Palestinians, can and do meet each other in equality and in dignity. Let me give some background why it's so rare that there is such a place, why this is such a special, holy place in my eyes. Where we live, in what you might call the West Bank, in what I call Judea and Samaria, Israelis and Palestinians live in the same place, but completely separate. Different towns and villages, different educational systems, different health systems, different transportation systems, of course, different cultures, religions, different shopping centers, everything, but everything is separate. Not only is everything the two sides do and think separately, but also there's no common ground. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. There's no common ground. There's no place. There's no space. There's no real estate where the two sides are welcome. Palestinian towns and villages, Israelis are forbidden from entering by Israeli military law. And Israeli towns, cities, settlements in this area, the West Bank / Judea and Samaria, Palestinians are forbidden from entering except under armed guard as workers during work hours. But had there been an Israeli and Palestinian who wanted to meet each other over a cup of coffee, there is no such thing, but had there been, there's no place to do it. There's no place to do it. Until 8.5 years ago, we founded the Dignity Center. The Dignity Center is strategically located right where Israelis and Palestinians pass by in the main road. Both sides feel comfortable there, and the meetings take place. It's not only, in my eyes, a holy place, it's also something like a mental health clinic, because I think that most Israelis and most Palestinians are a little bit sick. I mean, mentally ill. We grow up and we teach our children and our grandchildren. Ignorance of the other, stereotypes, perhaps even racism, lots of resentment, and overall fear. We're afraid of the other side. You never meet the other side. And in the Dignity Center, in all of our myriad educational, cultural, religious activities, the two sides meet each other. We break the ice. We have facilitated and unfacilitated activities, whether it's our summer camps or our day camps, whether it's the photography workshops, whether it's the music therapy, whether it's open houses, whether it's interfaith dialogue, whether it's lectures, whether it's learning the other side's language, whether it's religious celebrations together. You're surprised that you meet a human being. You're surprised that you're surprised, but you're still surprised. People come up to me very often after activities, say, that was great. I say, what was so great? They say, well, I talked to that person over there. The very fact that we can cross the divide and meet the other side, what happens is a little bit of healing. Not completely and not everyone, but a little bit of healing when we begin to realize that those stereotypes are not completely true, that resentment is not completely in place, that fear is by and large unnecessary, and we begin the process of finding friends and partners where we thought there was only an enemy. So that's the Dignity Center. And that's much more exciting than me. Now I'll introduce myself. So as you heard, I'm Hanan Schlesinger. I'm one of the founders of Roots. I live in Alon Shvut, which is a town settlement in the Gush Etzion area, half an hour south of Jerusalem, between Bethlehem and Hebron. About myself, well, you're looking at me, I have this big beard and I have this kippah. I'm a religious Jew. I'm deeply connected to the land of Israel, to the people of Israel, to the state of Israel. I feel that the people of Israel are all part of my family, and the land is part of our identity. That's why when I was 18, I made Aliyah. I was born in New York, but I got on the plane, picked up my 2 bags, and I ascended to the land to be home, out of a sense that for 2,000 years we've been hoping and yearning and praying and crying, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, to come home to Zion. I wanted to fill that, and indeed, upon coming to the land, I felt fulfillment of the dreams of our forefathers, of the prophecies of the prophets, of all our great sages of the Middle Ages. I fulfilled the dreams that they only could think about and pray about. And when I came home, I was 18, as I said, I didn't want to move any place, didn't want to settle any place in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. I wanted to come to the center of the land, to the cradle of Jewish and biblical civilization, and that is what many today call the West Bank, which I call Judea and Samaria. And I call it Judea and Samaria for the same reason that I moved here, not for politics, but rather for history. I call it Judea and Samaria, that's what the Bible calls it. Judea is the area south of Jerusalem where I live. Samaria is north of Jerusalem. That's where the Bible is written. That's where during most of the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived on our land, that's where we lived. We almost never made it to the coastal cities of Haifa, Ashkelon, Yaffo. Those were Hellenistic cities. Earlier, they were Philistine areas. We have our history, our archaeology, our artifacts, the Bible in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. That's home. That's where you feel the chain of tradition, the continuity that you are writing the next page in Jewish history. You're part of a chain of tradition. For me, it's really, really powerful. And then, about 8.5 years ago, I learned that in a certain sense, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't mean that everything I said for the past 6 or 7 minutes was a lie. I mean that it's a half-truth. You see, for all my life, I thought that my story, my identity, my connection to the land was the only story in this land. And I learned that it was not, is not the only story in this land. There's another story in this land. For 33 years of living in the land, I'd never met a Palestinian for real. I'd given a cup of coffee to a menial worker. I'd exchanged a few pleasantries, but I never knew deeply what they were about, what makes them tick. You see, for me, the Palestinians were part of the gray drab scenery, but not part of the movie. They pass in the background. They're not part of the plot. You really don't have to take them into account. I was blind. They were transparent. My education, my identity did not leave room for anyone but us. And so I could safely ignore them, not purposely, but I didn't have the mental and cognitive and spiritual building blocks to see them. Until 8.5 years ago, I'm driving in my car in this area of Gush Etzion, and I have two guests from the States in the car, Protestant pastors. They wanted me to show them how the land is flourishing again, how the sons and daughters of the land of Israel are coming back and fulfilling the dreams of Isaiah and of Zechariah and of Jeremiah. And with great pride, I showed them the buildings we've built and the roads we paved and the forests that we planted. And as we're driving from place to place, I picked up a hitchhiker. Then I picked up another one. Two young men were in the car now, together with me and my two pastor friends. And the hitchhikers asked to get out of the car after a few minutes. They got out. And then one of the pastors, one of my two guests, he was from Texas, he said to me the following words. He said, "Hanan, you just taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. Thank you so much. We've never seen anyone pick up hitchhikers. In Texas, no one does that." So I said, to Bob and Kevin, I said, you know what? It's not just me. We all pick up hitchhikers around here because we trust each other. We have a common vision. And just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin. Even worse, I was lying to myself. I do not pick up every person who puts out his finger. I pick up only Jews. But I didn't know that I pick up only Jews. I said and I thought I pick up every person, which means that I didn't see the Palestinians, or I didn't see them as human beings. They didn't register. And it hit me like a ton of bricks at that moment, perhaps because they were pastors who were having deep religious discussions of, self-introspection. I realized that something was wrong with me. I had a blemish that had to be dealt with. So I decided that I was going to fix it. I was going to do what I could to make the Palestinians real people in my eyes and in my heart. How was I going to do that? By meeting them. So I went on a journey to meet Palestinians. And the truth is that after weeks and months, my journey basically faltered. I was stymied. I couldn't find the way to do it. No one can introduce me. There's a Palestinian village literally 500 yards from my front door. It's called Khirbat Zakaria. I'm told that there are 600 people there, living there. But I didn't know anyone. I couldn't just walk over and knock on a door and say, I want to meet you. I was afraid. And then it happened over Facebook. Long story, can't tell it all, but I was invited to meet Palestinians. I see that Noor has just joined us now. Very nice. So I was invited to meet Palestinians. It was going to be the last Wednesday of January 2014 in the afternoon. I had a map. I knew where to go. So I get up from the chair in my living room I'm sitting in. I walk towards the door. I open the door, start walking out. My wife says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to meet Palestinians." And what happened is that she screamed, "You can't go. They'll kill you." And I approached my wife and I saw the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. Leave me. She was really afraid. I knew I had to do this. I walked out of the house. I didn't take the car. I walked. It was about a 25, 23-minute walk, and my heart's pounding. Perhaps they will kill me. I had no idea. Perhaps I was doing the wrong thing. I was afraid. And I got to the place I was going, this piece of Palestinian farmland surrounded by a stone fence, a gate at the entrance. I walk in the gate, and inside there's no buildings, really nothing, a few trees. But I saw something I'd never seen before, something that you'd say is a miracle, can't happen. I saw 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians, and they were talking to each other. Doesn't happen around here. They were in little groups, 2 over here and 3 over here and 4 over here, and I saw a Palestinian woman standing alone. She's in brown from head to toe, only her face is visible. Clearly she's an observant Muslim. I walk right over to her and I say hello in English. She said hello back to me in English. We talked for about a minute. And then I said to her, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you." I couldn't believe it, really. And she said to me, "I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers." We kept talking for a short amount of time. The conversation was interrupted because her son walks over. And the woman tells me, this is my son. His name is Yazin. He's 17 years old. So Yazin and I shake hands. And I immediately see he's wearing a windbreaker. And on the windbreaker are written 3 words right over the heart: seeds of peace. Seeds of peace. I had no idea what seeds of peace is, but I knew one thing, that peace and Palestinian don't go together. How could this young man be wearing a jacket that says peace? He doesn't believe in peace, doesn't know anything about peace. He's a Palestinian. Why is he wearing the jacket? I said to myself. I said to him, Yazin, what's the seeds of peace thing? And really, I was expecting, tell me, I don't know, I found this jacket. And to my surprise, he said it's a summer camp in Maine, USA, and it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for summer of recreation and reconciliation. He said he spent the whole summer, that past summer, in the camp, had a great time, met Israeli kids, their friends on Facebook, and now he said he was so affected by that summer that he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our two peoples. And I remember listening to Yazin and not knowing if I can believe what he was saying, because it contradicted everything that I knew. And you might say, with hindsight, that Yazin was the first Palestinian that began the process of unsettling me. And then his father walks over. So Jamal and I shake hands, and Jamal tells me that they're from Beit Umar. And I have half of a heart attack, because I know Beit Umar. Beit Umar is about a 6-7 minute drive to the south of where I live, on the way to Hebron, on the way to the cave of the patriarchs, on the way to Kiryat Arba. I passed down there with my car hundreds of times. My car has been stoned. I've been ambushed. My wife and my kids are screaming as the car is running. I remember that. I have a friend who was murdered there. A doctor coming home from Hadassah Hospital. He was shot at night by someone presumably in Beit Umar. So I know the people in Beit Umar, they're dangerous. And I'm talking to this guy, and ends up I just talked to his wife, I talked to his kid, they're from Beit Umar. So this was, to make an understatement, challenging for me. So we talk. Jamal starts telling me a lot about himself. I'll just repeat 2 anecdotes. He tells me, Hanan, you know, there's no Jews, there's no Israelis in Beit Umar. There's only the Israeli soldiers who guard the entrance to the gate. We hate them. They make life miserable. Since they're the only Jews we know, we hate all Jews. No one in Beit Umar would want to ever meet a Jew socially, except, he said, for this neighbor he had many years ago in Beit Umar. And this neighbor said, Jamal, I participate in interfaith dialogue sessions between Jews and Muslims in the city of Jericho. Come along with me and see what it's like. And Jamal told me, Hanan, he said, I told my neighbor, I'll never, ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. But his friend wouldn't get off his back, kept trying to convince him. It took him a few months. Eventually, Jamal tagged along. And he tells me that day, the Jews and the Muslims sat in a big circle in a room in Jericho, and they talked. And I, Jamal, he said, I didn't participate, but I listened. I sat in the corner. And at one point, one of the Jewish men got up from his chair and looked at me. Started walking towards me. I'm really afraid what he'd do to me. He came right up to me and he forced me to shake his hand. Then he started asking me questions. He wanted to have a conversation. I had to answer him. It was really, really unpleasant. When finally walked away, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand after touching a Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this cursed place. He went home, told his wife what happened. She agreed it was a terrible sin, according to Islam, and they should never go back there, of course, and never tell anyone in Beit Umar about it. But Jamal's friend wouldn't get off his back. Jamal, come again, bring your wife. He said, I can't, she doesn't allow me. The friend talked to Jamal's wife. I don't know how it happened. Jamal and his wife went back there. Again, and again, and again. And then Jamal tells me, Hanan, where I thought there was only an enemy, I discovered a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me. Well, I'm listening to Jamal, and I can't believe it. I'm unsettled. I'm confused. I'm a little bit angry. How could this be? What's he talking about? Can I believe him? And then he tells me another story. He says, Hanan, there's lots of little kids in Beit Umar, and some of those kids, when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, Jamal, why do they start to cry? And he got like frustrated that I didn't understand why you start to cry when you see Hanan. So what are you talking about? He said, you don't understand? He said, no, I don't understand. Then he said, it's the kippah that you have on your head, and it's the beard. Because everyone who looks like you, they carry submachine guns. He does like this. They walk into Beit Umar and they kill the kids. Silence. What am I going to say to him? I thought it was borderline anti-Semitic. And I have to tell him off. I have to set him straight. But somehow I understood that my task at that moment was not to set him straight. It was to listen. I understood that this is a moment of blessing. The first time in my life that I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. What I have to do is hold the experience and try to absorb it. I tried to absorb it. It was really difficult. I didn't know what to say to him. And then a light bulb goes off in my mind, and I see in my vision my grown sons, 2 of them, and my son-in-law walking with the kids and the grandchildren in the fields around where I live alone, Shvut. And of course, they're all carrying pistols, like just about all of the men around. And I suddenly realized that those guns to little kids in Beit Umar may be frightening. So I say to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he says to me, no, you're not afraid of us. We're afraid of you. And like at that moment, I understood, but I didn't understand. Like intellectually, okay, but really, what is there to be afraid of? We don't use the guns. We're peace-loving people. It's only for self-defense. We wouldn't hurt anyone. And I was so confused and so challenged and so upset. And later, after meeting a lot of people, we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis, perhaps a little bit more, 15 Palestinians, perhaps a little bit more. And the convener of the event from the Palestinian side, who was also the owner of the land that we were convening on, Ali Abu Awad, got up to speak. And Ali says as follows, my name is Ali Abu Awad. Thank you everyone for coming to my family's land. Welcome. We are from the Abu Awad family, a proud clan for generations upon generations. We lived in Kubeba. Parentheses, I didn't know what Kubeba is. Then he said, in 1948, the Israelis came and threw us out, and they turned it into Kiryat Gat. So Kiryat Gat, I know what that is. I know where that is. And he said, our family, our clan came in 1948 here to the West Bank, to Beit Umar. We're living here since then, 1967. The Israelis came again. Now we're living under the rigors and the difficulties and the suffering of the Israeli occupation. And Israeli occupation, he said? Never in my life had I heard a human being use those 2 words in my presence, Israeli occupation. Now, understand, I've heard those words on the radio. I read in the newspaper, the European Union, United Nations, always condemning the Israeli occupation. But I never met anyone who really thought there was such a thing, who knew what it was. What is this occupation thing? When I walk in the fields of Samaria, when I drive on the roads of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? And suddenly I hear from Ali Abu Awad that our Jewish triumph of the spirit is his nation's tragedy, and our nation's righteousness is his nation's suffering. And he tells us about the Israeli army breaking into his house in the middle of the night, beating up his mother. She was sentenced to 6 years in jail. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail and never told the charges against him. I'm hearing all these things and I'm going crazy. I'm breaking up inside with anger and confusion. I want to get up and say, Ali, you're a liar. That can't be. We don't do things like that. But he wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He wasn't giving a political argument. He was just telling the story of his life very calmly. And I went home that day nauseous, just nauseous. I remember being nauseous for days upon end. How could they say this? They said they live in Palestine, but I live in Israel. Where's this Palestine thing? They said they're fighting for freedom, but I know that they're terrorists. They talk about tragedy. I know about Israeli independence. What's going on here? They talk about the terrible things the Israeli army does, but we have the most moral army in the world. I was confused and I was upset and I was nauseous as I feel these different truths, these different opinions competing inside me. And I knew that I had to figure this out. And it's not going to be by books. Ali Abu Awad seemed to be a really, really nice guy and a smart guy, so I wanted to meet him. I went back to the place where we first were at that gathering, and I found Ali there. And I found Jamal there also. And it wasn't just me, it was a few other Israelis that were at that first gathering that wanted to talk more. We were 3 and 3, then we were 6 and 6, we were 10 and 10. For months. Every single week, at least once a week, into the wee hours of the night, we came to talk. What we basically did is just one thing that has two sides to it. We told stories and we listened to stories. The Palestinians told us the story of their history and their identity, and we told the story of our history and our identity. I want to tell you, when a Palestinian tells Israeli Jewish settlers that he's fighting non-violently for the freedom of Palestine, that's like a dagger to our hearts. It contradicts everything we know. It was really, really hard to listen. Sometimes you want to run away. Sometimes you want to shout and resist. Sometimes you feel like a traitor for listening. But we listened. And we also were given the chance to tell our story of 3,000 years of connection to the land of Israel, story of 2,000 years of exile, the story of coming home. And when a Jew from New York like me tells Ali Abu Awad that he's come home after 2,000 years, it's like a dagger to his heart. It was really hard for the Palestinians to listen. They said they never heard such things before. But we listened until it hurt, and we listened more. And after months upon months of painful listening, Ali said the following: it looks like we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart and two peoples into one land. We began to see and to hear how the Palestinians go to sleep at night dreaming that we Jews are going to disappear tomorrow because they know we don't belong. And the truth is that we Jews go to sleep at night dreaming the Palestinians are going to disappear tomorrow because we know they don't belong. And both sides are certain the other side doesn't belong here. Only we belong here. And eventually 5 years to 50 years, 500 years, they'll get the message and they'll leave. But then Ali told us, we have no other place to go. And we said to ourselves, but we have no other place to go. We began to see how both sides build their identities upon the nullification, the destruction, the erasure of the other side's identity. We think we can tell them who they are. They think they can tell us who we are. You know what the Palestinians say? They say, Jew, beautiful. The Quran respects Judaism, but it's a religion, it's a faith, it's not a people, it's not a nation, it doesn't require a land. So why did you come to take our land? Go back to Russia, go back to New York. And what do we say to them, Israelis to Palestinians? Palestinian? No, there's no such thing. You're an Arab. Never was a Palestinian state. So go back to Lebanon, go back to Saudi Arabia. Why did you come to take our land? And we both think we can tell them who they are, but we learned you can't tell anyone who they are. You have to listen and let them tell who they are, and then they may listen when you tell who you are. And it turns out, and this is really hard, that there's such a thing as the Jewish people, and there's such a thing as the Palestinian people. And furthermore, the Palestinians have a deep connection to the land of Palestine, and the Jews have a deep connection to the land of Israel. And it turns out that the land of Israel and the land of Palestine are the same land. I heard and I believe that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, it's all Israel and it's all Palestine. That is a fact of history and a fact of identity. And what began to happen to us, the growing circle of people that were sitting and listening week after week and month after month, is that we began to realize that there's two truths here. And you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. I can be right and you can be right as well. It's all Israel and it's all Palestine. You belong here and I belong here. My connection to land doesn't nullify your connection to the land. What we have to do, and this is what we've been doing for the past 8.5 years, is trying to overcome the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity, that sense, that national, cultural, religious sense that says it's only mine. I'm right and you're wrong. I belong and you don't. My people is for real and your people is fabricated. We're legitimate and you're not. And these insights of two truths in one heart, they're the foundation of the organization we created, Roots. In Hebrew, Shorashim, and Arabic, Judor, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. I'm going to end by making 2 points. The first point is that one of the many things that distinguishes the work of Roots among other peace organizations is that although we of course believe and teach that both Jews and Palestinians are human beings, we go beyond that. It's not just about meeting a human being. It's also about meeting a human being who carries a unique, particular religious and national identity. I have to meet Palestinians not just as human beings, but I have to come to see, to respect, and to accept, and even to cherish and empathize, not just with them as human beings, but with them as bearers of that unique identity. And so for the Palestinians, they come to meet us Israeli Jews, not just as human beings, but as Zionists, as Jews, as people with a unique particular heritage that ties them to the land, no less than the Palestinians are tied to the land. So it's about particular identities meeting each other. We in Roots are mostly religious Jews, mostly settlers, mostly right-wing, what you would call the enemies of peace, meeting the Palestinians. And the Palestinians that we meet are mostly the same, religious Muslims. And Muslims who lost a lot in 1948 in the Nakba, refugee families. And many of the Palestinians we work with have been in Israeli jail or have family in Israeli jail. The two poles are coming to meet and we discover there is common ground. And the last thing I'll say is you didn't hear me speak a word of politics. Why not? It's not because Roots believes that politics is unimportant. No, we believe politics is very important. We believe we need a political solution to this conflict. We believe that the present political configuration in which Israel rules militarily over another people is bad, is wrong, is terrible, has to change. It has to change politically. So why didn't I talk politics? Because we in Roots believe that this conflict is political, but it's actually much deeper than political. It's not just borders, it's not just resources. It's not just security. It's a conflict over identity. I'll say that again. It's a conflict over identity. Who are we and who are they? Is this the land of Israel, the land of Palestine? Do we belong here or do they belong here? It's a conflict over identity, and the source, the foundation, the groundwork of the solution is not in politics, it's in pre-politics, in the human-to-human connections that Roots establishes, the human-to-human connections that allow us to recognize the identity of the other side, to cherish and to trust, and even to embrace the identity of the other side. And that is the beginning, the grassroots, the framework from which a future political peace settlement can sprout. Thank you.
Okay, wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Rav Hanan. And I know that we will have many, many questions for you. So now it's my pleasure to welcome your colleague, Noor Awad. Does he have the ability to unmute himself? Hopefully so.
Yes.
Okay, hi. Beautiful. So I've not yet had the pleasure of meeting you face to face, but wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us this evening. And Mr. Awad is a Palestinian refugee who now resides in Bethlehem and serves as a tour guide there. And also, of course, it works a lot with dialogue and with Rav Hanan at Roots. And we really, like I said, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight and to share your story as well.
Thank you. So Rav Hanan actually explained very, very well and on a very deep level, like what the work that we are doing in the transformation process that he went through, and I can say also other activists at Roots experienced this transformation past a few years since the establishment of Roots. I will share with you my personal story and how I came to Roots. My name is Noor Awad. I live in Bethlehem, and I was born in Amman, Jordan, 1991. I usually say that my story goes before that. My story started before that. In 1948, my family used to live in the area of Jerusalem, in a village near Jerusalem, where they had to leave their homes after the village was attacked by the Jewish Israeli side. And my family, my grandparents, end up in refugee camps here in Bethlehem. So I know that my grandfather didn't want to stay in the refugee camp, and that's why they were hoping, actually, my grandfather was hoping that they will go back to their homes soon after the war and the attacks will stop. But the war ended in a ceasefire agreement, 1949, where my grandparents were not allowed to come back as Palestinian refugees. But my parents were born in Bethlehem, both of them, and they found themselves, they grew up under the Israeli occupation after 1967. So my father lost hope, and he felt that there is no future for him here, and that's why he left to Jordan. My mother also felt it was too much for her. There was no hope in the situation. My mother was a nurse in a hospital in East Jerusalem when the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, started, and she worked there for 2 years, and after 2 years she decided to leave. And that's why my parents moved to Amman, to Jordan, and I was born there. In 1995, the Oslo peace process was in the middle, was actually happening. And that brought hope to my parents to come back, to move back to Bethlehem, because now they are talking the end of the conflict. Now they are talking about the end of occupation and a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And that hope brought my parents back. The first years I lived here, even though I was very young, I still remember my first years here. I don't remember the conflict, actually. I don't remember the occupation. I mostly remember the times when my father used to work in Jerusalem. I remember when we used to go to the beach. I'm not saying that the conflict or the occupation disappeared in those years, but that's what I remember from the first from my first years living here, until the year 2000 came, and the political process, the peace process that was supposed to bring an end to the conflict and into the occupation, it failed to do that. And therefore, it left us with frustration and anger and violence on the ground. And that violence with the occupation turned into a second intifada, a second uprising. So I grew up during the second intifada. And my life here was like in the second intifada to live like in a war zone. My father lost his job in Jerusalem. There was no schools to go to. There was fights in the street outside. The Israeli army was here, like in Bethlehem 2002, in the streets of Bethlehem. So it was living in a war. I grew up during that time, and I start to ask myself like the question of what should I do? What can I do about it? And first thought, the first idea I had was that there is no hope here. There is no future in my country. And as long as I'm living here, I will live under occupation. and my life will be interrupted and will be abnormal under this occupation. So I thought I should run away, meaning going to somewhere else, another country where I can start a new life there. On the other hand, I couldn't just disconnect myself from what's happening around me and say that I just will run away from it. I start to think, what can I do about it? And what can we do about it? And when I say we, I mean my people, but I mean specifically my generation. Because I can blame the enemy for what they are doing for us. I can blame the past generations for handing us this situation. But what my generation responsibility? That's what I start to ask myself. And I figured out that if everyone thought like me about running away, then no one is actually going to fix the situation for the future generations. And it's going to be bad, and it's going from bad to worse. And therefore, I start to think, even though it's frustrating, but we have a responsibility for the future generations to fix the situation here in my country and in the occupation. That's what I start to focus on. And I'm going to do that with resistance. And mostly resistance means, or the examples of resistance in my head back then was the examples of violence. How we are going to rise up and fight against their occupation and in the occupation. That's what I think about resistance. I also learned about Palestinian communities who are following nonviolent ways of resistance against the occupation and not using the violence as a tool. But the most important idea here, whether if I'm fighting against them with violence or without violence, whether I'm resisting them with violence or without violence, I don't see the Israelis as human beings. I don't experience them as legitimate human beings. I only experience them as enemies, as soldiers, especially where I live in the West Bank. The only Israelis I can meet are Israeli soldiers at the checkpoints, when they come to Bethlehem, when they came to my house, when they arrest my cousins, or Israeli settlers from far away. I see them at their bus stations, in their cars, in their bulletproof buses, in their settlements, and I hear about the news every day about new settlements and new lands being stolen by settlers. So that's how I meet the other side. By 2016, I was already a tour guide licensed by the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism and Activities here in the West Bank. And I start to guide groups of tourists who come to Bethlehem, where I live. And I start to also work with the groups of students, foreigner students, mostly American students. And one day I was guiding a group of American students. They came to Israel and the Palestinian occupied territories for a 2-week trip. And the idea was that they are part of this program called Middle East Studies, where they focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in those 2 weeks, they are focusing to learn more about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I took this group to the city of Hebron, south from here. And I remember that day very well, where we drove on the main road on the highway, passing all of the settlements. I talk about the two-state solution. I talk about the settlements, the occupation, about the future, what's going on, about the present. And we get to Hebron. We talk about Hebron itself and about how the Palestinians are living there and the relationship with settlers. And at the end of the tour, at the end of that day, before we go back to Bethlehem, we had to stop for 2 meetings. One meeting was still inside the old city of Hebron with an Israeli settler. And that settler was a speaker who was going to talk to us and deliver the perspective of Israeli settlers in Hebron. Now, it happened before that I met speakers like this, but I didn't really have the chance to listen to what they say, because they meet my groups inside the settlements or inside areas where I cannot reach. I'm not allowed to be as a Palestinian. But that speaker insisted that day that I should join the meeting in a way, and we did. And he started to talk to us and tell us more about himself and who he is and his background. And I remember him saying that day two main things. The first thing he said, there is no occupation. And it was my first time ever I hear someone denies the occupation. What do you mean there's no occupation? I call myself a Palestinian. I live here in Bethlehem in Area A under the Palestinian Authority. But we all live under the occupation at the same time, under the Israeli military law. And our life is affected by the occupation on the macro level and the micro level. Everything you can think about, from water to electricity to telecommunications to airspace to borders to movement, everything is controlled by the Israeli military here, and that's the occupation. And then the second idea he said, there is no Palestinian people. And this one I was more familiar with, actually. It wasn't the first time that I hear that the other side is trying to deny our presence, our mere existence and presence on this land. And I was frustrated to hear these things from him, of course. He was my first Israeli, technically, to meet and sit and listen and talk to him and talk with. And this is what I felt. I felt a lot of denial and delegitimization. And if I had negative ideas, and I had negative ideas about the other side, bad ideas, he kind of like affirmed all of the bad ideas that I have about the other side. Then we left Hebron, and on the way back to Bethlehem, we had to stop at Roots, actually. And I had no idea what Roots is. Roots is the same organization that I'm talking on its behalf today. And I asked, and I was told that Roots is a peace organization between Palestinians and Israeli settlers. And I was shocked. I actually was angry on those Palestinians who are sitting with settlers and talking about peace. What peace you are talking about? What this peace looks like? To accept occupation and to accept settlements, that our land is being stolen. So I went there and I wanted to see those Palestinians, to confront them, but I found no one. I only found Rabbi Hanan there, who was waiting for us to tell us about Roots. And we sat there and I listened to Rabbi Hanan's story that day, the same story that he shared with you tonight. And at the end of his speech, I was very challenged. I was very surprised. I felt like I might be open, and I agreed with him, even though like it felt at the beginning that there is no way I can agree with the things he's saying, and we are enemies. But after I listened to him, I felt a lot of empathy and recognition that my side is being recognized. I'm being recognized. And more than that, he's able to empathize with us and empathize with our truth, with our narrative as well, with who we are, with our identity. And I left Roots that day thinking, how can that be possible? Can I do that on my side? And I went back to Roots to meet more Palestinians and Israeli activists and to understand better what Roots is doing. And at the end, I joined Roots because I understood that we are working on the grassroots level among the people who are living on the front lines of the conflict, but we are working on the identity as well, meaning that the occupation today and the violence and terrorism and everything we are suffering from on both sides and we speak about is the symptom of the real conflict. And the conflict is with our identities, and how do we practice our identity, as Rabbi Hanan said, and how we have this exclusivity in the ownership of the land and the belonging to the land. And basically, we see no legitimacy on the other side at all. And that's where Roots is working. It's working on the concept of reconciliation. Maybe someone would say this is not the first level of conflict resolution. At first, we need a political agreement. We need some sort of some sort of a process, steps. But we believe, or I believe, that we have to start to work now and not to wait for the political process to start. We have to work between the people now, and we believe that this work on the ground is necessary. As Rabbi Hanan said, it's the pre-politics, it's the foundation that the solution will be built on to last. So that's what the work that we are doing, and that's some of our beliefs. Thank you for listening.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of that. So we now have some time for a Q&A.